The village of everything is possible. Covering up the impossibility of the endless chain proposition at the center of MLM's creed would require that traditional beliefs and values associated with capitalism be exaggerated and distorted into a grotesque version of the American dream myth. The pyramid proposition itself is an absurd misappropriation of the general tenet of perpetual capital market growth. MLM deviously distorts this general concept into a specific business model for every individual's downline to expand to infinity. No company or industry had ever offered such a false income proposition or made it into a business model until MLM. To dispel critical thinking and immerse recruits in the fairy tale, extreme persuasion and thought control were necessary, and such methods were also readily available on the American scene. The transformation movement and the explosive rise of MLM beginning the 1960s are virtually concurrent. Amway and one of its counterpart schemes at that time, Holiday Magic, were both started within just a few years of the Esalen Institute, the progenitor of many large group awareness training programs, some with credentials of academic psychology and proclaiming breakthrough technologies in human potential. In addition to running Mind Dynamics, the mind reform training program of Holiday Magic, founder William Penn Patrick produced a booklet in 1967, later made into an LP recording, entitled Happiness and Success Through Principle. The recording is presented as a moral prescription for life, a righteous and authoritative argument for acquisitiveness and rationale of wealth as a natural outcome of virtue. It has the tone of a stern religious sermon, economic dogma as an all-encompassing moral code. Both William Penn Patrick and Glenn Turner, founder of the rival MLM Coscott, cast themselves as holders of eternal secrets to happiness and financial success, converting their recruiting schemes into human potential crusades. Turner's own recorded homily, The Village of Everything is Possible, promotes the magical belief that all circumstances can be altered by a positive shift in viewpoint and attitude, and that optimism and confidence ultimately determine reality. This metaphysical claim made the finite limits to recruiting and the fact of market saturation mere circumstances to be overcome with belief. The refrains, "Believing can make it true," "Everything is possible," and "Miracles can happen," are now ubiquitous in the human potential movement, many churches, self-help groups, and are taught even in corporate training courses. What is often overlooked in these magical tenets is the corollary: nothing is objectively true. Viewed generally as a positive, inspiring, and uplifting perspective on life, in the hands of pyramid scheme charlatans and cult leaders, the "everything is possible" proclamation becomes a tool to destroy personal identity, subvert critical thinking, and to blow up lifelong perceptions of what is real and true. When life circumstances, background, direct experience, or a lifetime of learning are dismissed only as a limiting perspective that can be reshaped, abolished, or transformed by merely altering perspective, people are suddenly vulnerable to new and dominating interpretations. Thought control and undue influence are more possible. Describing the classic conditions where authoritarian rule gained acceptance, Hannah Arendt explained, quote, "People reached the point where they would think that everything was possible and nothing was true. The public did not particularly object to being deceived because it held every statement to be a lie anyhow." While less flamboyant than Patrick and Turner, Amway's two founders, Jay Van Andel and Richard DeVos, were no less doctrinaire and portrayed themselves in similar fairy tale roles as geniuses of startup capitalism, creators of winners and millionaires, and champions of small business. They added claims of Christian piety and law-abiding rectitude. Their bios depict them as having personally built a financial empire from a tiny startup business based on door-to-door selling and run out of their basement. This fictional narrative abetted the false claim that Amway's endless chain scheme was a, quote, breakthrough opportunity for the average person to become successful and wealthy like DeVos and Van Andel and other top Amway recruiters who were similarly portrayed. The storyline was embraced by the Republican Party and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, where they insinuated themselves into top positions. Their bogus bios as iconic American success stories who are now offering everyone else a way, Amway, to replicate their wealth and success meshed with extreme political and economic agendas opposing government safety net programs and promoting individualism. Ponzinomics was embedded into the American dream mythology as a true pathway to its fulfillment. In fact, DeVos and Van Andel floundered in failed enterprises after leaving military service and then signed on as door-to-door sales recruiters for Nutrilite. The pair spent more than a decade at Nutrilite, groomed and trained by MLM's inventors, William Castleberry and Lee Mittinger. By chance, they got in at the very beginning, even before Nutrilite had competitors, and when the company explosively spread its recruiting scheme across the entire country. The FDA prosecuted the company because the recruiters, DeVos and Van Andel included, were making dangerously false medical claims to new recruits and the public. Van Andel and DeVos were pushing classic snake oil, according to the FDA. Later, the FTC would claim they were pushing financial snake oil too. The two defected from Nutrilite about 1960 to spin off a virtually identical and competing enterprise they called Amway, precisely copying the Nutrilite structure and pay plan. They even brought over the very same terminology, calling their endless chain scheme mysteriously the plan. They also persuaded as many as 5,000 of Nutrilite's sales force to defect with them to launch Amway. Leveraging political connections, they escaped subsequent pyramid fraud prosecution, but were found guilty and penalized for income claim deception, price fixing, and tax evasion. From its own disclosures and court data, it is fully documented that far less than 1% of people enrolled each year in Amway's income opportunity made any profit at all. Some reported devastating losses in addition to profound social dislocation. Calculating all the people all over the world that have invested time and money in Amway since its inception, and factoring the enormous churning of new recruits, the shocking reality is that Amway arguably caused more financial loss to more people than any comparable business on earth. It achieved this infamous record while proclaiming itself the, quote, greatest income opportunity in the world. Such is the total disconnection from the real world that people experience when entering MLM's alternative fact universe. It is a world as fantastical as any of the exotic and bizarre cults that are known today, while dressed in conventional business attire and other trappings of authentic business. The scale and audacity of the MLM deception, including how the scheme operates, where it came from, who its leaders are, and what consequences it produces, are literally beyond most people's imagination. Only in America.